I call the Minister for Urban Infrastructure.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. Well, here we go again, yet again the Shadow Minister maintaining the tradition of being a Labor Shadow Minister for Communications, of continuing to assert, in the face of the gathering evidence that the rollout is going badly, when the light of broadband availability is spreading across the land, it falls to the Labor Shadow Minister to look for gloom. Let's remind ourselves of Labor's history of trying to claim in the parliament something that was quite at odds with the reality. And their preferred tool for doing that is a matter of public importance debate, because on the 17th of September 2015, the then member for Blaxland, or the member for Blaxland who was then the Shadow Minister, brought forward the topic, the Prime Minister's mismanagement of the National Broadband Network. At that point, 1,291,635 Australians able to connect. He was at it again on the 21st of October 2015, the Prime Minister's second-rate NBN. By that time, the number able to connect had risen to 1,374,408. By the 10th of February this year, he tried again. The Prime Minister is failing Australians with his second-rate NBN. Of course, the numbers continued to show an inexorable rise in the number of people who could be connected. By that point, 1,719,122 on the 3rd of May. On the 3rd of May, remarkably on Budget Day, Labor chose to raise the NBN as their brilliant wheeze as a topic for the matter of public importance debate, and then it was the government's failure to deliver on the NBN for Australians. By that time, the numbers had risen to 2,428,606. So we see, as Labor continues to insistently deny reality, what is happening is that the numbers of people who can connect are rising steadily, strongly, inexorably, due to the fact that we have a competent government competently delivering the rollout of this complex infrastructure project. Now, the member for Blaxland was delighted, I am sure, to finally be relieved of this smelly dead cat of a portfolio and to hand it to the member for Greenway. And she's been continuing to try and assert in some Stalinist fashion the alternative reality, at odds with the truth, at odds with what is actually happening, because by the 11th of October, Mr Deputy Speaker, the number of premises that connect had risen to 3,207,727. So that inexorable, relentless, continuing rise in the number of people who can get the National Broadband Network has been continuing, even while the member opposite, the Shadow Minister, has been trying desperately to assert that reality is at odds with what the numbers, what the reality, what the empirical observations tell us. And today she's at it again, untroubled by the empirical evidence. She doesn't mind. She's not interested in what the numbers say. She's going to blind herself to that. She's going to turn a blind eye to that, and she's going to put forward the proposition, quotes, the government's latest failures on the NBN, as the number of premises which can connect is now standing at 3,426,350. Mr Deputy Speaker, we can only conclude that there is some kind of Labor Shadow Communication Minister version of the prayer which is the opposite of the prayer of St Francis of Assisi. Where there is light, let me look for darkness. Where there is progress, let me assert problems. Where there is a network being rolled out with the numbers steadily and relentlessly increasing, let me, in an increasingly desperate and frankly somewhat unhinged way, assert the existence of an alternative reality. Let me clutch at the day-to-day vagaries of a massive project and claim that they show, to quote from her media release, quotes, the government is in absolute disarray, close quotes. The position, Mr Deputy Speaker, is absolutely the opposite of that. We are seeing a steady, relentless, continuing increase in the number of people who can connect. Those numbers are reported on the company's website every week, and the company is on track. It has repeatedly said that it is on track, and its performance is backing up what it is saying, that by the end of June 2017, half of all premises, 5.4 million, will be able to access the NBN. It will be three-quarters of all premises in Australia by the end of June 2018, and that builds on a steady increase in the number of premises. By the middle of 2014, 604,000. By the middle of 2015, 1,165,000. By the middle of 2016, 2,893,000, and now, Mr Deputy Speaker, as I've recently informed the House, 3,426,350 premises now able to access the national broadband network. Now, Mr Deputy Speaker, the claims of the Labor Party would be absurd even if they started with a blank slate. But we know they do not. The Labor Party, when it comes to the national broadband network, starts with a record of delivery. That is one of the great displays of policy and execution incompetence in the history of the Commonwealth. The rank ineptitude of the other side of this House when it comes to the question of the national broadband network will still be studied in case studies in schools of business and government in 20, 30 or 50 years' time. Let us not forget, Mr Deputy Speaker, that what Labor proposed in the 2007 election was there was going to be a national broadband network. It was going to be a 12 megabit per second network. It was going to deliver fibre to the node to 98% of premises. It was going to cost $4.7 billion, $4.7 billion, and the private sector was going to pay for half of it. What happened, Mr Deputy Speaker? None of that got delivered. None of that got delivered. In a display of rank ineptitude, they managed to completely fail to hold a competitive selection process, and in 2009 they were forced to admit they couldn't do it. So then we had a new plan, the $43 billion fibre to the premises model, which was announced in a lather of excitement, and of course we were told the private sector was still going to invest. Don't worry, the private sector is still going to invest in the national broadband network. And guess what? That didn't happen. The implementation study, which was dropped out in the dead of night in May 2010, disclosed that the private sector advisors to the then Labor government, KPMG and McKinsey, said the private sector is not going to touch this with a barge pole, and guess what? It turned out to be 100% government funded. And now it turns out that these geniuses in corporate finance, Mr Deputy Speaker, these geniuses presume to come in and lecture to this government about the financing structure of the national broadband network. What an extraordinary proposition after their rank display of incompetence and ineptitude over the 6 years in which they were in government. Let's not forget that then Prime Minister Rudd urged Australian mum and dads to invest through Australian infrastructure bonds. That didn't happen either, and we should be very relieved that it didn't, because that would have been a spectacularly poor piece of financial advice. So this Labor opposition's track record when it comes to corporate finance, when it comes to the finance structure underpinning the national broadband network, is a track record that any rational person would be acutely embarrassed by, and you certainly wouldn't be returning to the topic in some Pavlovian fashion week after week, month after month, as if you wanted to remind the Australian people of the gross display of incompetence and lack of credibility on this topic that manifests when it comes to the Labor Party and the national broadband network. And now the Shadow Minister is in a lather of indignation, because what we have said is that in addition to the cap of $29.5 billion on equity funding from the taxpayer into the national broadband network, we have also said that there will be debt finance. We've consistently said there will be debt finance. As the company said just last week, it was very encouraged by the indicative credit ratings that it received from the credit agencies, and we are, of course, confident, as the Minister for Finance said, that yes, we could have raised private sector debt, but what we've chosen to do at this stage is raise the debt from the government. Why? Because it is cheaper. A very simple reason: it saves money for taxpayers. This is a financing strategy which saves money for taxpayers, but this debt will be assumed by the private sector within a few years, and this is a rational, cost-effective strategy to maximise the best outcome when it comes to the national broadband network. And the proposition that the Labor Party, which delivered such a spectacularly inept display, which skulked out of government with barely 50,000 people connected to the national broadband network, the proposition that they should presume to lecture to this government, the proposition that they should be sufficiently irrational as even to raise this topic, is frankly quite extraordinary. You've got a clear contrast. On this side of the House, you've got a government which is systematically, steadily rolling out the national broadband network, this complex project which we inherited in absolute disarray, On the other side of the House, you have a party which has a hopeless track record on delivery. When it comes to NBN, they've got a lot to be ashamed of when it comes to this topic.
Listen,